Flight 822's captain had suffered a heart attack at 38,000 feet. The co-pilot was unconscious from smoke inhalation. 247 passengers were about to die when a woman in seat 23F calmly stood up and said 5 words that changed everything. "I can land this plane." Captain Michael Stewart had been flying commercial aircraft for 28 years. At 52, he prided himself on routine perfection. Every flight planned meticulously. Every protocol followed precisely. Flight 8982 from Boston to Los Angeles was supposed to be just another Tuesday morning departure, another smooth cross-country flight to add to his spotless record. The Boeing 737-800 lifted off from Logan International at exactly 7:47 a.m., carrying 27 passengers and a crew of 6. Weather conditions were optimal, air traffic minimal, and the forecast showed clear skies all the way to LAX. Stewart settled into his captain's chair with the comfortable confidence of someone who had made this route dozens of times. "Beautiful morning for flying," commented First Officer Sarah Chen, adjusting her headset as they climbed through 20,000 feet. At 34, Chen had 15 years of commercial flying experience and had earned Stewart's respect through her precision and calm professionalism. "Best kind of day," Stewart agreed, monitoring the climb rate. "Should have you folks in Los Angeles right on schedule." In seat 23F, Rebecca Torres stowed her small carry-on bag and settled in for the 5-hour flight. At 45, she dressed in simple business attire, navy slacks, white blouse, minimal jewelry, the uniform of an unremarkable business traveler. Her son David, 22 and fresh out of college, occupied the seat beside her, already absorbed in his tablet. "Thanks for flying out with me for the interview," David said, not looking up from his screen. "I know work trips aren't your thing anymore." Rebecca smiled slightly. "Sometimes the most important journeys are the ones we take together." David nodded absently, missing the weight behind his mother's words. For 12 years he had known Rebecca as a quiet marketing consultant who worked from home and rarely traveled. What he didn't know was that Colonel Rebecca Torres, retired, had logged over 4,000 flight hours in military aircraft, including 500 hours in the exact Boeing model they were currently flying. During her service, she had trained extensively on the U.S. Air Force's C-40 Clipper program, the military variant of the Boeing 737, making her transition to this aircraft seamless. The first 2 hours of Flight 8884 suited exactly as Stewart had predicted. Passengers dozed, read, or watched movies. Flight attendants completed service with practiced efficiency. The aircraft tracked precisely along its flight path, autopilot engaged, all systems functioning normally. Then, at exactly 9:43 a.m., everything changed. Stewart felt the first stab of pain as a sharp pressure in his chest, radiating down his left arm. He'd experienced minor chest discomfort before, occupational hazard of a sedentary profession, but this was different. Intense, immediate, frightening. "Sarah," he said, his voice tight with strain. "Something's wrong." Chen glanced over, noting the captain's sudden pallor and the sheen of perspiration forming on his forehead. Her training kicked in immediately. "What kind of wrong, Captain?" Stewart tried to respond, but found himself gasping, clutching at his chest as waves of pain coursed through his upper body. The textbook symptoms of cardiac arrest were unmistakable, and they were occurring at 38,000 feet with 247 souls aboard. "Mayday! Mayday!" Chen immediately radioed, her voice professional despite the crisis unfolding beside her. Flight 80 under Stu declaring medical emergency. Captain incapacitated, requesting immediate vectors to nearest suitable airport. But their problems were just beginning. As Chen reached for the emergency medical kit, a cascade failure in the aircraft's electrical system triggered smoke in the cockpit. What had started as a minor electrical fault became a serious hazard as smoke began filling the confined space, reducing visibility and creating a toxic environment. Chen fumbled for her smoke mask, but inhaled several lungfuls of acrid fumes before securing it properly. The smoke was thick, chemical, burning her eyes and throat. Her vision blurred as the toxic fumes began affecting her coordination and consciousness. Control, losing, Chen managed to whisper into her radio before slumping forward, overcome by smoke inhalation. The cockpit was now filled with unconscious pilots and toxic smoke, while 2047 passengers remained unaware of the crisis developing just feet away from them. Senior flight attendant Jennifer Walsh noticed the acrid smell first. In her 20 years of commercial aviation, she had experienced everything from severe turbulence to unruly passengers, but the sharp chemical odor now filtering into the cabin triggered every alarm bell in her professional consciousness. She moved quickly toward the cockpit, following protocol for checking on crew welfare. What she discovered when she peered through the reinforced door's window made her blood run cold. Both pilots were unconscious, smoke was visible, and the aircraft carrying nearly 250 people was flying on autopilot with no conscious human oversight. Walsh keyed her intercom with hands that were steady despite the magnitude of the crisis. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a medical emergency with our flight crew. Please remain calm and stay seated while we address the situation." The announcement had the opposite of its intended effect. Passengers immediately began looking around anxiously, whispering among themselves, trying to understand what medical emergency with flight crew actually meant. When the chemical smell became stronger and more noticeable, whispers turned to concerned voices, then to genuine alarm. "Are the pilots okay?" called out a businessman from first class. "Is someone flying the plane?" asked a mother holding a young child. Walsh maintained her professional composure while privately calculating their options. She had basic emergency training, but nothing that qualified her to land a commercial aircraft. The autopilot would keep them flying straight and level, but fuel was finite, and they would eventually need human intervention to safely reach the ground. "Is anyone aboard this aircraft a qualified pilot?" she announced over the intercom, trying to keep desperation out of her voice. Several hands went up throughout the cabin. A private pilot from seat 14A, a crop duster from 31C, and a flight instructor from 8B. All identified themselves, but as Walsh quickly interviewed each, her heart sank. Private aviation experience, while valuable, was nowhere near sufficient for landing a commercial airliner. The difference between flying a Cessna and controlling a Boeing 737 was like the difference between riding a bicycle and driving a Formula One race car. The aircraft began to experience slight turbulence as the autopilot made minor corrections. To experienced flyers, these were normal adjustments. To already nervous passengers, every bump and shift felt like a harbinger of disaster. David Torres looked up from his tablet, finally noticing the tension around him. "Mom, what's happening?" Rebecca had been monitoring the situation with growing concern, her trained ear picking up subtle changes in engine note and flight characteristics that most passengers wouldn't notice. When Walsh made her announcement about pilot qualifications, Rebecca felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "There seems to be an emergency with the pilots," Rebecca told her son quietly. "But someone can fly the plane, right?" David asked, the first edge of worry creeping into his voice. Rebecca looked at her son, the young man she had raised, largely as a single mother, protecting him from the classified details of her military career, maintaining the fiction of a quiet civilian life. For 12 years, she had successfully buried Colonel Rebecca Torres beneath the persona of a suburban marketing consultant. "Mom?" David pressed, noting her prolonged silence. The turbulence increased slightly as weather patterns began affecting the autopilot's ability to maintain smooth flight. Walsh made another announcement, this time with visible strain in her voice. "We are working to resolve the situation. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and remain calm." But calm was becoming impossible to maintain. Children were crying. Adults were praying or making what they feared might be final phone calls to loved ones. The reality of their situation was becoming undeniably clear. They were trapped in a flying metal tube with no conscious pilot, limited fuel, and no clear path to safety. Rebecca Torres made her decision. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to taking charge in crisis situations. Her movement was deliberate, controlled, radiating an authority that cut through the cabin's growing panic. "I can land this plane," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin despite not being raised. The effect was immediate and profound. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Crying children quieted as if sensing something significant was happening. Even the white noise of passenger anxiety seemed to pause as 2046 pairs of eyes turned toward seat 23F. Walsh approached cautiously, hope and skepticism warring in her expression. "Ma'am, I appreciate your willingness to help, but this is a very serious situation. Are you actually qualified to fly commercial aircraft?" Rebecca reached into her jacket pocket and produced a worn leather wallet. From it, she extracted a military identification card that had expired 12 years earlier, but still carried the unmistakable authority of official credentials. "Colonel Rebecca Torres, United States Air Force, retired," she said, handing the ID to Walsh. 4,000 flight hours, including 500 in this exact aircraft type. "I'm current on Boeing 737 systems and qualified for commercial operation." Walsh stared at the identification, then at Rebecca, then back at the ID. The professional credentials were undeniable, but the woman standing before her looked like any other middle-aged passenger. David's mouth fell open as he processed what his mother had just revealed. "You're a colonel? You flew military planes?" Rebecca turned to her son with an expression that mixed apology with determination. "Some stories are complicated, David. Right now, I need to focus on getting everyone home safely." Walsh made her decision with the pragmatism of someone who understood that their options were severely limited. "What do you need from us?" "Clear path to the cockpit, and I'll need your help managing passenger safety during approach and landing," Rebecca replied, already moving toward the front of the aircraft with the purposeful stride of someone transitioning from passenger to pilot. As Rebecca passed through the cabin, passengers watched with a mixture of awe, relief, and residual fear. Here was someone claiming to possess exactly the skills they desperately needed, but she had been sitting among them as an ordinary traveler just moments before. "Is she really a pilot?" whispered an elderly woman. "Military," confirmed her husband, who had caught sight of Rebecca's identification. "The real deal." The cockpit door opened to reveal the full extent of the crisis. Captain Stewart lay unconscious, vital signs weak but stable. First Officer Chen was barely conscious, breathing through a smoke mask but unable to focus or communicate effectively. Smoke had largely cleared, but the acrid smell lingered, and several warning lights indicated ongoing electrical issues. Rebecca slipped into the captain's seat, her hands automatically finding familiar controls despite the 12-year gap in her flying career. Muscle memory, honed through years of high-stress military operations, began reasserting itself as she quickly assessed the aircraft's status. "Tower, this is Flight 89-2, she radioed, her voice carrying the crisp professionalism of military aviation. "I have a new pilot in command. Previous crew is incapacitated due to medical emergency and smoke inhalation." "Flight 89-2, say again." "Who is speaking?" "Colonel Rebecca Torres, Air Force retired, assuming command of this aircraft. I hold current qualifications for Boeing 727 operations and am requesting immediate vectors to nearest suitable airport for emergency landing." The tower's response came after a brief pause, during which Rebecca could almost hear the controllers conferring about this unprecedented situation. "Colonel Torres, we're showing Denver International as your best option. Weather is favorable. Emergency services are being notified. Can you confirm aircraft status and passenger count?" Rebecca quickly scanned the instruments, her training allowing her to process complex information rapidly. 247 souls aboard, fuel remaining approximately 40 minutes, aircraft systems mostly nominal with some electrical irregularities. I am qualified and ready to accept approach clearance. The professionalism in her voice, combined with her use of proper aviation terminology and procedures, convinced the controllers they were dealing with a genuine pilot rather than a desperate passenger with good intentions and minimal skills. Flight 8 was 2. Clear direct to Denver. Descend and maintain flight level 240. Emergency services will be standing by. Rebecca began the descent, her hands working controls that felt both foreign and familiar. 12 years was a significant gap in any pilot's currency, but crisis training and muscle memory were proving stronger than the passage of time. In the cabin, Walsh made an announcement that was part information, part reassurance. Ladies and gentlemen, we are under the command of a qualified military pilot who will be landing us safely in Denver. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and prepare for a normal approach and landing. David remained in his seat, still processing the revelation about his mother's true background. The woman he had known as a quiet, risk-averse consultant was now confidently piloting a commercial airliner through an emergency situation. Everything he thought he knew about his family history was being rewritten in real time. "Sir," the passenger beside him said quietly, "your mother just saved everyone on this plane." David could only nod, too overwhelmed to speak. Rebecca established communication with Denver Approach Control, receiving vectors that would bring Flight 892 to a safe landing. The approach would be challenging. She was rusty, the aircraft had some electrical irregularities, and she was operating under intense pressure, but her military training had prepared her for exactly these kinds of high-stakes situations. Denver Approach. Flight 892 requesting priority handling for emergency landing. I have limited recent flight time in this aircraft type. Flight 892. You're cleared for straight-in approach runway, 34 left. Wind is 240 at 15 knots. Emergency vehicles are in position. As the aircraft descended through clouds toward Denver, Rebecca felt the familiar sensation of complete focus that had carried her through countless military missions. External pressures faded away. There was only the aircraft, the approach, and the precise execution of procedures that would bring everyone safely to the ground. The passengers, meanwhile, watched through windows as the ground grew larger beneath them. Some prayed, others held hands with strangers, and many simply trusted in the calm competence of the woman who had stepped forward when expertise was desperately needed. "Final approach," Rebecca announced to the cabin, her voice steady and reassuring. "Everyone prepare for landing." The Boeing touched down at Denver International with what felt like a gentle kiss against the runway. Not Rebecca's smoothest landing. She had been better in her prime, but well within safe parameters and exactly what was needed under the circumstances. As the aircraft rolled to a stop, surrounded by emergency vehicles, the cabin erupted in applause. Passengers cheered, cried with relief, and called out thanks to the woman who had emerged from anonymity to save their lives. Rebecca completed the shutdown checklist with methodical precision, ensuring all systems were properly secured before allowing herself to acknowledge what had just happened. She had successfully returned to the cockpit after 12 years of civilian life and landed a crippled aircraft carrying nearly 250 people. Walsh entered the cockpit as emergency medical personnel arrived to attend to the unconscious pilots. "Colonel Torres, I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks necessary," Rebecca replied, removing her headset. "Just doing what needed to be done." David appeared in the cockpit doorway, his expression a mixture of pride, confusion, and gratitude. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me?" Rebecca stood and embraced her son, feeling the weight of 12 years of carefully maintained secrets. Some parts of our lives we keep separate until they're needed. Today, they were needed. As passengers deplaned, many stopped to thank Rebecca personally. She accepted their gratitude graciously, but with the quiet modesty of someone uncomfortable with attention. Several asked for her story, wanting to understand how an ordinary passenger had possessed such extraordinary skills. "I used to fly for the Air Force," Rebecca would say simply, declining to elaborate on classified missions or decorated service that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Emergency personnel transported both Captain Stewart and First Officer Chen to nearby hospitals, where both would make full recoveries. Stewart's heart attack had been serious, but treatable. Chen's smoke inhalation required monitoring but caused no permanent damage. Rebecca was approached by airline officials, FAA investigators, and media representatives, all wanting detailed accounts of the emergency. She provided necessary information to safety officials, but declined media interviews, preferring to fade back into anonymity. Colonel Torres asked an FAA investigator, "Would you consider returning to commercial aviation? Your skills clearly haven't diminished." Rebecca looked out at the Denver skyline, then at her son, who was still processing the day's revelations. "I retired for good reasons, 12 years ago. Those reasons haven't changed." 3 hours later, after giving statements and ensuring all passengers had been properly accommodated, Rebecca and David boarded another flight to Los Angeles. They sat in the same seats, 23E and 23F. But everything between them had changed. "Were you really a colonel?" David asked as their new aircraft taxied for takeoff. "I was many things in the military," Rebecca replied carefully. "Some I can talk about, others I can't. But yes, I was a pilot, and yes, I held the rank of colonel when I retired." "Why did you quit?" Rebecca watched the Denver airport falling away beneath them, thinking about classified missions and family sacrifices and the choice she had made to prioritize motherhood over military service. "Because some things matter more than career," she said finally. "I wanted to be present for your childhood, not just a uniformed stranger who visited between deployments." David was quiet for a long moment, processing not just the day's events, but years of misunderstood family history. "Do you miss it? Flying?" Rebecca considered the question honestly. "I missed it every day for 12 years. But today reminded me that some skills never really leave you. They just wait quietly until they're needed." "Are you glad you were here today?" "I'm glad I was in a position to help when help was needed," Rebecca answered. "That's all any of us can hope for, to be useful when it matters." As their flight continued toward Los Angeles, Rebecca reflected on the strange convergence of circumstances that had put her aboard Flight 89-2 at exactly the moment her skills were desperately needed. Coincidence, fate, or simply the random intersection of lives and events? She would never know for certain. What she did know was that 247 people were alive because she had chosen to maintain her flight qualifications during retirement, because she had overcome her preference for anonymity to step forward in crisis, and because sometimes the most important service happens when you least expect it. The media would eventually learn her identity and construct a narrative about the mystery pilot who had saved Flight 89-2. But by then, Rebecca Torres had already returned to her quiet life, content to be remembered simply as someone who helped when help was needed most. David would spend the following months learning more about his mother's classified service, understanding finally why certain topics had always been off-limits and why she had always seemed to possess knowledge and capabilities that didn't match her supposed marketing career. "I'm proud of you," he told her as they finally reached Los Angeles. "Not just for today, but for everything you gave up to raise me." Rebecca smiled, understanding that some revelations create stronger bonds rather than breaking them. "The best flights are the ones that bring you safely home," she said, "and I've been exactly where I needed to be for 22 years. From which city in the world are you watching this today? If stories like this inspire you, consider subscribing for more tales of ordinary people whose extraordinary pasts prepare them for moments when lives hang in the balance.